Hey, oh, see, I was still dancing there, Ben.
Yeah, I could see that. What a great background. Where is that from?
Oh, I don't even know. It's just a random picture I got from the internet.
Okay, well,
Hey,
yeah, so
everyone. How is
good
everyone
morning and good
doing?
afternoon, everyone.
Or morning or evening, depending where you are, right? So, welcome. My name is Sarah Kong. I'm a tech trainer, and actually, as I'm looking outside my window here in foggy, wintry Ontario, Canada. Ben, where are you?
I'm in Redmond, Washington today.
Mm,
And it's as usual, it's raining as you would expect here in Seattle, Washington.
yeah. Yeah, and where I am, I'm just outside of Toronto, and
Mm.
we've been getting your weather this year. Yeah. Last week we got a cold snap, but now we're into getting warm again, and hence why it's foggy, but there's still snow on the ground. Anyway, enough about weather. Welcome everybody to getting started with the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure. That's a mouthful. Say that fast 5 times. But this is an hour and a half session, and we're going to go through great stuff about the Cloud Adoption Framework. But before I get into that, I must introduce our lovely, lovely moderator. So say hi to Megan. Megan is the one that is going to be moderating the chat. She's our lovely senior product marketing manager here at Microsoft. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to talk amongst each other, but pay attention to us as well. Just throw it in the chat, and Megan will make sure that you're covered. If she feels it's a question that myself or Ben should address, then she'll let us know, and then we'll address it. So cool. But before we get into all the content, what is the content and where do you get it from? And that's a big one, right? So, the cloud adoption framework, this is our learn modules. And as you can see, hold up your phone if you've got a phone and click on that, and you can takes you right to the link. As you can also see down at the bottom of the screen, there's a banner going with the AKA link. But what you're kind of looking at here, and let me pop it up here, is you're looking at something like this, right? And as I scroll down, you can see the different modules for this learning path. One of the things I do recommend is that you definitely log into this, so that way it can track what you've done. Because if you don't get finished a module, then you can always come back and do that. So I know, Ben, you would say to something about other modules that people should be looking at to help.
Yeah, so what we're going to be talking about today is getting started with the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework. So when you get started, you're really thinking about I'm I want to get to the cloud. I understand the need to adopt the cloud in some way. So how do you do that? How do you get started? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. By the way, I didn't introduce myself, so let me do that really quickly. My name is Ben Brower, and I'm in the product marketing team in the Azure and industry go-to-market. So my primary focus is to work with people using patterns and practices and best practices within for Azure. So that's me. So anyway, just wanted to give you a quick understanding of what we're going to cover today, and then what's also available today. So when you think about getting started, the primary thing you're trying to do is just understand what do I do first? Like, how do I go from 0 to 1, and then from 1 to 2? So that's kind of what we're going to cover today. And so we're also going to make sure that as you think about your next steps, so once you've kind of, adopted the cloud to a degree, what do you need to do next? So there's a lot of deeper content that you can learn. And I think, Sarah, you have a couple of screens there that can show that. So the first thing you can do, and Sarah, if you want to
Yeah.
go through that just open
Yeah,
up.
so if you want to learn about like the migration and modernization, it's so easy to find it by just popping open a browser tab. Obviously, use Edge because what else would you use, right? But Edge is obviously focused on Microsoft products, right? So our search engine. You can go in here and I can type like migration and mod. See, I've done this already. But for example, if I want to learn about migration and modernization, didn't even spell that right. But that's the thing, you don't need to know how to spell properly. And then hit that in there. Then as you can see, what you're looking for is the links that say Microsoft Learn. And then when I click on that, I can scroll down and I can see all the other learning paths that I can learn about, because one of the biggest things, with a cloud adoption framework is migrating and modernizing your workloads, which is what we're going to discuss here shortly. So these are some other learning paths that you can get into, right?
Yeah, and as you go deeper, and as you go about modernizing your applications, and just thinking about how many applications are you going to end up modernizing or bringing to Azure, there's other ways to go about becoming subject matter experts or experts in Azure. So there's various certifications you can also do. And Sarah, I know you're being an MCT, you've got quite a bit of
Wow.
understanding of how that works.
Yeah.
So yeah, so there's two main certifications that the cloud adoption framework and the well-architected framework help to support. One of them is what's called the Azure 104, which is mainly for administrators. And then the other is at AZ 305, which is for, here we'll show you what AZ 104 looks like. This one is quite useful for people who are wanting to learn to administer their Azure environment. It goes through lots of different content and ways to use the various aspects of Azure. So both the portal and the various CLIs, and how to go about making sure your Azure environment is ready and continuously ready for needs. Now the AZ305, and Sarah, I know you teach this course, so
Yeah.
I'll let you go ahead and give a quick
This
intro.
is probably, well, AZ-104 is near and dear to my heart because it was the
Mm,
very first Azure course I taught and
mm,
the very first Azure exam I passed way back when,
mm.
after taking it 2 times and failing it twice before. It's not an
Oh, it's
easy
not easy.
exam.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
an easy one.
It's a tricky one because there's a lot of concepts you need to know. And anyway, so Easy 104 is kind of like the starting one that you would take first. And this is what we always recommend is to take the Easy 104 first, or essentially the Easy 900, which is our fundamentals. Get the fundamentals and then take the Easy 104 and then finally get your Easy 305. And this one is the architect, which will you become that architect expert. This is one of my favorite ones. I love to teach this because I'm all about, whiteboard design concepts, architect concepts, and really understanding, you know, how you take all the Azure resources that you've learned about, right, or services, and how you piece them together and why you would use, like, why am I going to use Azure Load Balancer over Application Gateway? And what is front door compared to Traffic Manager? And why I'm going to be using it. So this one answers a lot of the why, whereas the AZ 104 is a lot of what is it? Like, what are these concepts? And then this will
Mhm.
give you that why. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you want to go deep, you want to really understand from different perspectives of how to go about using Azure better, those are two great certifications. By the way, those certifications do well in the market too. If what you're trying to do is look for a new job or look for a raise or look for something
Yeah.
new in your career, those certifications go a long way.
Yeah. As soon as you start posting that you passed, I guarantee you within a month, you'll get, people pinging you and saying, hey, we have a job if you would like
Yeah,
to.
yeah.
The other thing too, which we should mention too, Ben, is that this series is a series of 4, right?
Mm.
So this
Hmm.
episode that you're currently watching right now is the cloud adoption framework, but there is 4 more episodes that are coming up. So January 31st, so next week, we got the landing zone. So continuing the CAF discussion. I like to call it CAF, cloud
Hmm.
adoption framework. I know I'm being
Yep,
lazy. And
that's okay.
then on February 7th, I'll be back to with David, and we're going to discuss the well architected framework. and then finally finishing off with the Azure Advisor. So there's 4 episodes. Oh, look at that, it's on Valentine's Day. So there's 4 episodes, and then these are all your different moderators that you'll see, or different presenters, and then obviously our lovely moderator. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Yeah, that's so let's dive in.
Yeah,
There's
let's
a
get
lot
to it.
to yeah, there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
So first of all, let's kind of just set some stage. Let's set the stage for what we're trying to accomplish here. So what we realize is that every customer, every company out there, every organization in most cases are digital companies. They have this need to have a web presence. They have a need to have email. They have a need for different aspects of being part of the digital economy. And so to at that point, you need to start thinking about what does it mean to host your applications, or what does it mean to run an application, or do I have a data center that is uh, too expensive, or do I have potentially thousands of applications that could be, on premise, in the cloud, in a multi-cloud environment, etc. Or am I looking at, looking at my digital economy, my digital transformation as being strategic, where I need to think about an innovative approach. And so when you start thinking about it in those terms, that essentially every customer, every company is a digital company, you begin to think more holistically about what does it mean to adopt the cloud. So I think one of the primary things that you do first is you set up a website, i.e., you're engaging your customers. So when you engage a customer, you're effectively in a digital manner. You're basically reaching out to that customer in a way that is directly related to your brand, or directly related to your service. And so what you want to be able to do is be as attentive, as performant, as reliable as you can possibly be, and of course secure. And you want to be able to do all these things in a cost-effective manner. So those are all important aspects to engaging your customer. On the other hand, you may also be interested in transforming a product. So you might actually be in a manufacturing industry where you have a certain manufacturing process that has been, let's just say, antiquated. You may actually want to use an IoT type of solution where you're actually looking at information, or internet of things, sort of devices, where you're attaching these devices and wanting to get more telemetry data that basically makes the process better, and thus transforms the product and ongoing things. Um, Further down, you may be wanting to empower your people. So empowering your people could be an HR solution that makes it much easier for them to interact with this systems that you already have in place. Or what you may want to do is use a SaaS-based solution that is hosted somewhere in the cloud, not in your data center. And so these are different types of ways to empower people. Then, of course, there's the optimization of those operations. So we talked a little bit about IoT. That's certainly one way to go about transforming and optimizing your operations. But there's a lot of ways to go about operating or optimizing your operations. One is just using it within your own data center. That are there ways to go about transforming, streamlining your developer environments, or your uh, op, uh, dev test performance operations. And you may also want to be looking at just um, from a digital transformation perspective, uh, how do you go about, well, if you want to go about bringing services to the cloud, or applications to the cloud, you're going to most likely optimize in that manner. And we'll get into all that in a second.
Good.
Yeah.
So the other thing too is that with the customer cloud migration and modernization, before we get into that, I think there should be a discussion on all of this. Some of
Mm,
us, well, not some of us, but it is one of those ones where we look at and we try and figure out, well, what is IIAS. And if you know what it is, throw it in the chat, right? And let Megan give you a little thumbs up if you get it right. Keeping Megan going. So yeah, we got infrastructure. Oh, I said it. We got PaaS, and then we've got our SaaS. But the other one that we also talk about is we also talk about serverless, which is
Mhm,
kind of like where I like to think about it as the evolution of compute workloads, right?
mhm,
So if you think, and let me talk about serverless for a second here. If we think about where it started, back in what, the 60s or whatever, it started with mainframes, right?
mhm,
And then we evolved towards, working with physical servers, or what I used to call them back in my day, we used to call them server blades, right? Where you'd have racks of servers and so on. And then we evolved from there. And this was, I still remember this being at the 2015 Ignite conference in Chicago. And every session that talked about, oh, actually, I jumped ahead, about containers was standing room. But before the containers, we had our virtual servers, and then we had our containers, if I can spell right, doing too many E's here, right? And then with the containers, this is where we really saw the ability of having, like a single server, that single server, which could be a virtual machine running, Windows. And then from there, we can install, multiple apps, right, on a single VM. So really evolving that way. And then when we move off of containers, a lot of times people will call it, my serverless. But I've also heard it referenced as microservices. And
mhm.
I always wondered, here, I'm trying not to run into my other diagram there. I always wondered, the whole definition of serverless, and I'll say my definition, and Ben, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But I think about serverless is that virtual servers itself, like when you purchase them in Azure, you have to build that infrastructure, right? You have what we call that compute running cost, and you also have what we have is that drive cost. So there's always two costs, associated with creating these virtualization type of infrastructure as a service, where serverless allows you to run things like functions as code. So running things, without having the requirement of having servers built, you can just run code on demand. Is that probably a fair way of calling serverless, Ben?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, serverless is essentially that abstraction above the server. So
Yeah,
there's lots of ways to talk about it from a technical perspective, but that's effectively what you're describing is you've abstracted away the server,
yeah,
and you're now running the code as if that's all you need to know about is code in escrow and code in production. So those are two really important aspects because as a developer or as an architect, what you're most concerned about is what the functionality of that particular application. How is it being used? What are the main features? At the same time, of course, you also need to be careful that, and we'll get into that in a little bit,
yeah,
is the underlying infrastructure and the way you go about operating this code needs to be considered from your perspective as well, because not all of it is going to be based on the platform. Some of the reliability and security requirements are also going to be shared with the user or
yeah,
by the developer.
yeah. And
Yep.
it's funny because the word serverless used to always make me go, huh? Because essentially you're thinking, and if you think about it too in depth, you're like, wait, does that mean functions can run in the cloud literally, and we don't need servers? It's like, no, 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 no. There's
No,
still servers,
there's
but it's a whole
yeah.
management, right? And this leads me into this conversation when we
Mm,
talk about the three of these, right? This
mhm,
is all part of what we call our shared responsibility model, right? And what
mhm.
are you responsibility? Have to say that as I write it. So what are you responsible for? And when we think of infrastructure as a service, this one is probably the most hands-on, right? So what I mean by that is you're managing. Let me write this. You're managing your infrastructure. So this is where you're going to still need to build um, your um, your virtual networks. You're going to need to install your virtual machines. You're going to install your operating system, manage your own, your own updates and everything. Whereas PaaS, if you've already put it in the chat, platform as a service, what this one does is it allows you to just manage sort of like your information, your security, your application. We will pre-build the infrastructure. Right? And if you think about some of the InfraPad solutions, and if you can think of any, throw them in the chat. But one that always pops up in my head first and foremost is something like Azure App Service, right?
Mhm.
That's a PaaS solution. Or we have, SQL database, right? So the Azure SQL database, that's a PaaS solution. Now, you don't have to build the SQL server and install the operating system and the virtual network. You just tell us, I want a SQL server. Here's the compute requirements I need, and we will build that for you. And that's kind of what PaaS is. And then SaaS, I think everybody knows the solution for that one. That one's easy.
Yeah.
Microsoft 365, right? Your Exchange Online, your SharePoint Online, Teams, right? These are all your types of your SaaS applications. And as you know, with these ones, do you need to install anything? Well, no. You just basically, manage your data in there and then set up your security first and then what features you want, right? You can enable and disable features, what licenses you require, and then start using it. Anything else that I could miss there?
I think the only other thing I would point out with this sort of concept here, going the spectrum you're seeing, is the kind of service level agreement that you would have with
Mhm.
your with Azure and Microsoft. So the typical service level agreement in a IaaS scenario where you're managing the infrastructure yourself is going to be a much larger sort of well, let me say it differently. It's going to be minimized to just the platform, where the service level agreement will be focused on how is Azure running as a platform, and that's going to be related to things like, is there redundancy across the Azure infrastructure? How does your how secure are the facilities within Microsoft and the Azure data centers? Uh, how efficient are those data centers? And so those will all be part of your service level agreement in an IaaS situation. Now, if you were to go up to PaaS, PaaS is going to be more related to, it'll have more included in that service level agreement, where there will be more information about how the PaaS-based service is being supported by Microsoft as part of the overall platform. And so that's another aspect that you need to also know. And then finally, the SaaS, with M365, et cetera, those are all just part of the overall service. There's an implicit assumption that Microsoft is going to run these services as well as and efficiently as possible.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And that's the one too that you always think, I know when I deliver courses and I get to this section on monitor or disaster recovery and backups, or people are like, we need to back up. And I'm like, of course you need to back up, right?
yeah,
And it's
yeah,
all part of your service level agreement. Like you said, like we don't back anything up because there's a cost associated with that, right? So we give you the tools to do it, right? But we don't necessarily give you, we don't turn it on for you, right? But some of the PaaS solutions, you can quickly, like a little flick of a switch, turn it on. Whereas your infrastructure as a service, you're going to definitely have to build that type of infrastructure to support your redundancy options. So now that we know all of these, how does that, tie into migration and modernization?
Yeah. So one of the first parts of any sort of cloud adoption is building out the strategy. And when you think about your strategy, you're one thinking about what are you trying to accomplish. And so we talked a little bit about that with the digital transformation. The next part of that is what kind of applications are you wanting to bring to the cloud or use in the cloud? So you could have new applications, which are basically cloud native applications. So what this means is basically you are building an application using Azure services and supported by Azure services. And so when you do something like that, we say that it's cloud native. Otherwise, everything else is existing applications, or an existing application probably is running on premise. It's probably run, or it's being hosted somewhere else in another data center, or in a managed service provider, or even another cloud service provider. These are all existing applications that either going to be migrated, modernized, replaced, or will stay on-prem, or wherever it currently is. And so when we're going to focus primarily on migration and modernization, because this is kind of where Azure is best used. Now, you could have replace, where replace is basically taking existing functionality or existing apps and replacing it with a SaaS or low code sort of scenario or solution. Well, we won't focus on that much today because it's a different set of considerations that you would end up doing. So let's dive into migration and modernization. So one of the most important aspects of migration versus modernization is that question: should you migrate or should you modernize the application that you want to bring onto Azure? So the primary thing to think about, and this is brought up several times in the Learn module, is the migration triggers are going to be more IT oriented. And what I mean by that is they're going to be more specific to things like your data center, or how cash flow is running, or the cybersecurity requirements that you have, or there's certain budget and resource constraints within your IT organization. So these IT-oriented sort of triggers are going to most likely give you a sense that you should migrate these applications. The reason for that difference of modernization is that modernization is usually really related to business-oriented decisions or business-oriented triggers. And so, for instance, if you're trying to enable hybrid work, that is a business-oriented decision because you're essentially trying to empower your workers to have a different way of working. The same goes with faster time to market. Faster time to market is very much of a business-oriented decision or goal. This is something where you want to be able to innovate fast enough to bring something to market. And therefore, that digital transformation concept is very much oriented towards bringing something to market as quickly as you can via an IT process. Cost optimization applications, this is more related to business because you're looking at the bottom line. This isn't just about budget and resource constraints as much as it is, can I run this application more efficiently? And if I'm doing so more efficiently, does that mean that I'm going to meet my users' demands as efficiently or as effectively as I am? And then finally, application innovation. This is really an area that we see a lot of customers moving. They realize that moving to the cloud will give them more opportunities to innovate. And that's because of the sheer number of services that are available through Azure. Right now, there's over 300 services. Many of those services are going to be platform oriented, but many of them are also going to be state of the art services that you can use for making your application better, such as AI. You could infuse artificial intelligence, or you can use some other way of basically bringing together more data, such as Synapse. And I think what you see with many customers, especially when you look at AI, is everyone realizes it's coming, and everyone wants to make sure that they're on that train because they don't want to be left. So application innovation is a big area, and it's why you see Microsoft spending so much time on that particular subject.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely yeah, just open your eyes and look at, the technology talk lately. It's all about AI, right? The big push to that. And one of the things I find, especially with migration and modernization, is,
So, sorry, sorry.
yeah,
I
sorry,
left
go
I
ahead.
left last one
Oh, you left one?
on that last slide, and I did that because it's actually maybe the most important one, and it actually sits in between modernization and migration, and it's scaling rapidly. So
Ah,
when you scale rapidly, what you're effectively saying is that there is some sort of demand spikiness or cyclical nature to that application, or you're a fast growing startup that you think you don't know how much capacity you're going to need for this particular workload, and so you just want to make sure that you have enough resources to meet the demand as you grow. And so those two types of reasons for a highly scalable infrastructure or application is probably the number one reason why people move to the cloud.
yeah,
And it's also very much of an IT and business decision. So many times what you'll see is, customers having a web application that is hosted on premise, and they need to they realize that there's too much spikiness, or that there's it costs too much to run this particular application on premise, because they've had to go through this big capex model of buying too many servers for those dips, where they could have just been able to basically use the cloud to scale back all the resources that are no longer necessary during that down period. So there's lots of reasons why people want to use the cloud, but this is the number one reason.
and it's so true because, and I actually need to show a little diagram here, but what you're just saying is that and even in when I was doing as a SharePoint administrator, so you purchase your hardware, and you purchase your hardware based on, what you assume is going to be your performance demands.
Mhm.
And I ran into this in an occasion where, I purchased a piece of hardware and I was looking at 30% consumption, right? And so that 30% consumption, but on average, I was only seeing 5% because no one had really adopted to SharePoint just yet. And this was before, the big SharePoint 2010 movement. And so what you're seeing is you're like kind of like flatlining, and then all of a sudden you'll get a little bump, and then you'll go along, and then you get, oh, just a little bit more bump, and then, oh, maybe we're going to be there. But what happens in this type of scenario is that you have all of this gray area right in here,
Mhm.
right? Where you're spending a lot of money and that machine is sitting there and being not being fully consumed. So with the scaling capability is that you can have a machine that's flatline, but as it scales, you then go up with it, right? So your virtual machine will be able to scale that performance, and then also scale out, and then scale back in. And
Right.
that is definitely what I see a lot of, is, the whole push into the migration is because you can't do that on premises, really. There's no way that I can set my machine to only perform this much and save myself that much money. So you buy a
Yeah.
machine and that's what you get, right? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, and so when you migrate or modernize, you have those two main ideas in mind.
yeah,
You're going to be either moving an application or updating an existing application. Those are really the ways you're thinking about using the cloud. And so the question then becomes, which one should works best for you? And so what we have here is basically three different ways to think about it. One is, what's the immediate business need? So if you kind of get a pretty good understanding of what it is, like, are you trying to cost optimize? Are you trying to move your operations model from a capex to an opex, where capex is capital expenditure versus operational expenditure. Did I get that right? I think I
Yes, you
did,
got it
but
right.
okay, good. I
I
always
hope.
forget those acronyms. um, and so if you're trying to move to that kind of model, then as we were just talking about, it's a much it's that's the business
Yeah.
need. Now, if you're also trying to figure out how difficult something is to move, and so this is actually a really big issue, and we'll
Hmm.
talk about this in a little bit, is the complexity of that application will probably determine if you're going to just migrate, or are you going to end up modernizing. And that reason why complexity is such a big issue here is that level of skilling is required. If all you're trying to do is move that application onto a VM in the cloud, probably doesn't need that much skilling. You know how to do that pretty much. However, if you're beginning to like decompose the application or the architecture into microservices, so or into serverless, then what that's going to take more skills, and that goes back to those AZ 305 sort of certifications that would be useful. And so those are really important decisions to make. The other aspect to this is you want to decide if this particular application is for innovation or not, and what sort of costs you're willing to incur if this is an innovative app. And so refactoring and rebuilding that application could be expensive up front. So the question is, are you ready to take on that expense? And then if you are, great, because then that most likely means you're going to see a higher ROI, but this is a decision you need to make. And then finally is the long-term business goals, kind of what I was just describing. So there's the app innovation, but then there's also things like productivity. So productivity is essentially where the application becomes easier to maintain, or it becomes easier to evolve. So these are two really big areas that makes a big difference in your decision to migrate or modernize.
Yeah. And how hard is this do? I can honestly tell you that just being as a trainer that we see a lot of companies are doing well, I shouldn't say a lot, but in general, when I survey and ask, my learners, I'm like, so have you modernized your apps? A lot of them are saying, no, we're just lifting and shifting for now. Right.
Mm,
And then we're going to look at modernizing and this is why I'm in this class. And
mm.
it's like you said, right? It's all about that skilling. So taking your DevOps course, and taking all of these ones, and really understanding, the back end needs that your staff will need to be able to, modernize that app. So what are the adoption challenges that we come across?
Yeah. So one of the key challenges is making sure that you're optimizing the use of the cloud, and this is where cost savings makes a difference. So, as you were just saying, there's a lot of customers out there that are basically just lifting and shifting their applications onto Azure, and what the problem with that model is, you often don't realize that there's a lot of secret costs or underlying costs in the way that application is running or how you go about operating that application. And that's because not all of the uh, costs are brought into that model. So, for instance, on premise, you may not realize that uh, that you're using a physical infrastructure and that there's a cost to that physical infrastructure. There's an operational cost to the people who are involved with ensuring that applications are up and running. And then you're not it, maybe not taking into account some of the software that is included in say security or networking, or other areas that are considered non-functional requirements. And so the question that becomes, what are you paying for? And this is actually where you start to realize cost optimization or cost efficiency is a really important aspect when it comes to understanding what you should be like, how you should go about adopting the cloud. And this is something we'll talk a lot about in just a couple minutes. But some other areas of adoption challenges, progressing with a cloud first strategy. A lot of customers still want to work with their on premise sort of
Mm.
strategy. So there's going to be a hybrid model, which is, for most customers, that's a perfectly fine scenario. In fact, with it, we have some really good strategies at Microsoft to make sure that your hybrid model is intact and is running as efficiently as possible. So things like governance and legacy and understanding things like network requirements are all things that are brought up in these sorts of hybrid models. But you need to understand how they work. And so back to skilling. Migrating more workloads to the cloud. This is one of those areas that we expect that customers are having challenge, because what they typically will do, and this is part of this course, is they will migrate one application at a time. And so often what happens in that kind of model is it's piecemeal. And a piecemeal it means that you're going to end up doing a lot of things over and over and over and over again. And if what you could do is give yourself kind of a consistent deployment model, and we'll talk about this with Azure Migrate, is if you give yourself a consistent deployment model where you understand the workload architectures by assessing those workload architectures, migrating those workloads in a consistent manner using a landing zone, talk about that more in a minute, and then making sure those applications are optimized once they've been deployed. Those are all going to be factors in how quickly and how many of these workloads you can move to the cloud in an efficient manner.
Yeah.
So anything else you'd like to add there?
I was just going to say that with the one that progressing on a cloud first strategy is, we see some of these like financial industries, government, health organizations, that they have a governance law that they can't have their data within the cloud. So those are the companies that might need to maintain hybrid. And I know definitely some of the banks here in Canada, their data can't sit in the cloud for governance. So it's not whether the fact that they don't want to, it's the fact that because of that governance law, we can't use a full cloud strategy. But there's so much advantages to having their application in the cloud and locking it down with, VPN and firewall solutions, and then having that data. Because as we just said in the previous slide, having the application in the cloud is going to give them that ability to have that scaling, right? So scaling and being, meeting their performances when they need to. So, so if you're looking at an application that you're like, yeah, well, I can't move it into the cloud because of my data, think about, well, maybe you could move the application, the front end, leave the back end, and then the front end, can take advantage of all of the scalability and the modernizing of that application. Yeah.
That's
Cool.
a great example. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think one of the things did you want to
No, I was going to
go
say,
ahead?
well, ensuring security, reliability, and efficiency through that's it for this slide, folks. So the
Okay.
next slide is balancing act. Now I'll let you
A
take it
balancing
away
act.
because you're good at
Okay.
balancing things. I'm not.
I don't think so. No, so I think one of the things that is most important about moving to the cloud is the ongoing nature of your business. You need to manage your business you need to be innovative. You need to continue, keeping up with the Joneses. But at the same time, you also need to mitigate and manage risk, such as governance. And so what often happens when you move to the cloud is that balance is crucial to making sure that you're adopting the cloud in a safe and secure manner, or a responsible manner, if you will. If you would like to go to the next slide,
Yeah,
we can
sure.
kind of build that out a little bit. So one of the things what we describe is accelerating innovation. Everyone wants to embrace the AI transformation. Not everyone, but most people do. A lot of people want to learn about it. A lot of people have sustainability goals. That's become something really big in many countries, especially in Europe. where there's these sustainability goals that are being promulgated by their various agencies in their countries. And so this has become a big issue, and therefore they need to be able to accelerate and make sure that they are covered and that they understand what the policy is. And then finally, there's always the need to implement new solutions. That's just one of those things that customers do now, especially as once they've had this digital transformation. Managing risks, that's like an ongoing issue that will never go away. You always have to be thinking about minimizing and managing your security and reliability incidents. Those security and reliability incidents are some of the most expensive sorts of IT mishaps, if you will. Though there's not just in terms of cost of the incident itself, but you could have brand erosion, or you could have different applications that are, let's say, they're mission critical. If you have a mission critical application that goes down, that application could affect the safety of your employees or the safety of your users. There's a lot of examples where mission critical applications, if they go down, let's say traffic control systems, that would be really bad. So you want to constantly remember that minimizing and managing security and reliability is just part of the table stakes.
I was
So
thinking more like e-commerce site goes down, so I can't
oh
shop
yeah,
on a sale day.
yeah. Well, there you go. I mean,
Right?
that's just as bad as a plane falling out of the sky.
Yeah. Okay, moving on.
Anyway, it's Black Friday. So meeting regulations and staying compliant is always one of those areas too. I mean, there's almost no customer, no company that doesn't have some sort of regulations that they need to report on. And so being able to do that in a way that's efficient, doesn't block your innovation, and continuously allows you to lower your overhead in this kind of area is a really important area for managing your risks. And then finally, avoiding financial penalties or losses. This kind of is in relation to making sure you stay compliant. Cost optimization is, or constant optimization, and this is the name of the series that these episodes are part of, is one of the most important areas that we're putting more and more effort into, more and more emphasis into. And that's because there's the need for cost efficiencies across the board. As I was saying at the beginning in this slide before, where we were showed that chart, cost optimization and cost efficiency is by far the number one reason why, or number one blocker for customers when they think about how much are they going to embrace the cloud. Sure, they may have some interest and they may have a couple applications in the cloud, but if cost is too high, then it's just not going to be there's just going to be a lot less uh, interest in
Yeah.
moving to the cloud. And so cost efficiency is a big area. And we just want to point out too, what we're talking about is cost efficiency, meaning that the cost of that application, running that application, might be very high. It could be a mission critical application. If it is, then you're going to probably take on a pretty high cost basis for that particular application, but you need to also make sure that that cost that you're taking on is efficient, meaning it's effectively dealing with all the issues, mitigating all of the risk that you have. And so it's a big part of when we say efficient versus optimized. And then finally, meeting targets and infusing performance and operations agility. These are areas where you'll always see a need especially from a cloud perspective, that you'll want to continuously focus on. So, do you have any
I
other
was just
comments
gonna
here?
say
Yeah.
I know when I teach this section about cost optimization, one of the things I always stress on is that,
Mm,
have a plan and, work with your stakeholders, have that service level agreement defined, and make sure everybody is, your stakeholders have bought into that service level agreement and agreed to it. And
mhm,
then from there, you can determine, what performance and operations you need. Because sometimes we think we need a disaster recovery site. Well, do you really need it for all your applications? It might only be portions of your mission critical applications, like you were saying. So if I have a mission critical application, then yeah, I need to build a bigger infrastructure to support my disaster recovery. But I might have a simple, employee application that they use for, setting up their vacation. Does that need to be part of the disaster recovery plan? No. So there's, working with your stakeholders and determining, what is more important than, or not, should say more important, but what is mission critical is a big piece that, has to have that conversation. Yeah. Okay.
So to point out the obvious, this is one of those slides where you just have to say it. Business, technology, and people. This is one of those areas that all three are necessary. But let's start with kind of where to start, and that's why we're having this conversation, is getting started. It really is about the business outcomes. That really helps to define the technology decisions. And so when you think about the business outcomes, these are all those different triggers I was talking about before. It's the reason why you're going about the digital transformation in the first place. And so once you kind of have a good sense for what those business outcomes are, and you can start to think about what is the technology you need in order to accelerate those business outcomes. So those are where you're thinking about building and managing and optimizing your cloud investments. And so when you think about your technology, you're really thinking about what is the underlying infrastructure? What are the applications that will help me reach these business outcomes? But, and maybe most importantly, is it's not just the technology, it's also the people. So both the technology and the people are going to support that business outcome. As we've been harping, the skill set is critical. And so not only do you have the right people or enough people, but you have the right skills to make sure the technology is meeting the goals of the business.
Yeah.
And I'll stop there if you
No, I
have.
thought that was great.
Okay. Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit more about the reliability and security of a workload. And it's a really important area, and I've kind of expressed this a little bit earlier around shared responsibility. We talked about things like this SLA. We also talked about the difference between an IaaS, and PaaS, and SaaS service. So let's dive a little deeper into each one of these areas for shared responsibility. So if you start at the bottom around Azure platform, what the Azure platform is about is basically leveraging reliability and security of the cloud. And why we say of the cloud, it's essentially Microsoft is operating a cloud environment on your behalf. And so why that's important is when we're ensuring that it's resilient and secure, and that foundation is going to basically allow for you to run your applications, host those applications, host your data, ensure that it's evolving effectively in a way that meets your needs. Now, when you move up the stack, when you start to look at the cloud and the customer cloud environment and the customer workloads, here we're talking about enabling reliability and security in the cloud. The reason why that's an important distinction is this is where you as a user of the cloud need to make sure that you're using the tools and the know-how that we bring to you so that you are your workloads are staying secure and they're staying reliable or resilient. And this is an important area because it's basically the same thing you needed to do on premise. These are things that you need to ensure that you have the skills to make sure that you have a secure environment, that your workloads are secure. And so with that in mind, it's no real difference. It's just meaning that you're using a different set of skills, probably, because now you need to know about how to use the tools and know how on Azure. But it also means that it's something that you'll continue to do.
Yeah.
One caveat is if you happen to have an MSP, a managed service provider, or another type of partner like this, they could potentially act on your behalf in terms of securing and making your applications reliable. Now, to do something like that, that's a different service level agreement with a different partner. So keep that in mind as you think about what type of model, what kind of operating model do you want for your cloud?
There we go.
Okay, all right.
There we go. You already said that.
Okay, okay, very good. So one aspect to and this is where we'll begin to actually get into the cloud adoption framework, is how to think about using the cloud adoption framework for your cloud environment. And then in two episodes from now, we'll start talking about the well-architected framework. And Sarah and David will be going deeper, much deeper into how to use the well-architected framework for optimizing your workloads. And finally, in episode 4 is where once that workload has been deployed, you'll be able to think more about optimizing those workloads as they are in the wild in production. So that's where you'll see topics about cloud cost management, and Advisor as a tool. All right, thank you. That's unless, do you have anything else to add there?
No, nothing yet.
Okay. All right. So this is just another way to look at how to build and secure reliable systems with the cloud adoption framework and the well-architected framework. So this is kind of a showing how to collaborate and coordinate both the way the frameworks work and the tasks that you're trying to accomplish using these two different frameworks. So if you're to start with the Azure platform there at the bottom left, basically this is a no-brainer. This is something that just happens. Now, that's because Microsoft is thinking about all the different functionality and facilities required to have a secure and reliable foundation. So we'll just keep it at that. Now, once you get up to the cloud, the customer cloud environment, this is where you'll start to use the cloud adoption framework, or CAF. This is where you'll do things like defining the vision, aligning your business strategy, and creating a cloud center of excellence. The cloud center of excellence is a term that we'll talk about, not so much in this session, but in the next session or the next episode, where we are introducing the concept of a landing zone. Then you move up into assessing priorities and building plans and business cases. This is really where you see the main strategy, the business owners really taking into account how we're going to move to the cloud. And then once that's done, you're still using the cloud adoption framework and the best practices found in the framework to do things like prioritize projects, build and design landing zones, and establish some sort of governance model. Once that's all done, and you're probably doing this in conjunction with your workload teams who are using the well-architected framework for a particular workload. So what they're essentially doing is the architect is designing an architecture that has been optimized for their business requirements. And so therefore, what you're effectively doing is that architect is saying, here are the requirements for my application. Here's the design of that architecture. Let's see how well it's going to be supported by the landing zone and the underlying infrastructure that is the cloud environment, the customer cloud environment. Once that's done and once it's ready to be deployed, the well-architected framework can then be used again, mainly for as a checklist to make sure that you've kind of gone through all the considerations of how this particular workload should be architected. And once that's done, once you've kind of checked all the boxes, then you can put it into production and see how well that application's doing. Is it meeting all the requirements that you had expected? Is that design effective enough? Should it be better optimized? Those are all questions that come in a production environment. And then finally, when you look at how that particular application is running in that environment, the question also becomes, how optimized is that environment? Is there a better way to utilize the services or utilize the resources within the environment? And it's at that point where you kind of have that nice symbiosis between the architecture that's been optimized and the infrastructure or the environment that has been optimized. So that's really where you're trying to get to. That's that well-architected state that you're trying to move to.
I should mention here that actually I'm going to erase this part right here that I
Mm,
wrote in there
uh-huh.
because when we talk about the checklists actually reside as part of the well-architected framework, right?
That's
So
yep.
with your
Mm-hmm.
5 pillars, which you'll learn about that if you or not if when you join us for episode 3, we'll be talking about the well-architected framework, but we're also going to be showing you we'll go diving deep into the 5 pillars, and each pillar has their own checklist, and it's actually quite cool. You can go through and make sure that, for example, the security pillar, here's what I need to make sure I check. So that way I know that I'm covering everything that needs to be covered for my security infrastructure pillar. And so that's all part of that. One of the things I really notice, or you'll really see with, the CAF and the WAF, right, the well-architected framework, is that they overlap, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they overlap and they work together, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the cloud adoption framework is not just something you start with and then you just kind of leave it, you put it aside once you start deploying workloads. It's definitely something that you will continue to use, right?
Yep.
I used to always think, well, once I've got the CAF in my cloud adoption framework set up, then I'm good, right? Then I can start building things. But you should always reference your cloud adoption framework to see, that not only are you building things, efficiently and prioritizing and and maintaining that business strategy, but are you also managing and optimizing all of that? So, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a big
Yeah.
piece.
Yeah. And we won't get into it in this session, but when you think about the landing zone,
Yeah.
that landing zone it will evolve based on or be customized based on the workload that you're planning to run, the criticality of that workload. So if the criticality of that workload says it's a mission critical workload, that will affect the way that landing zone is going to be used and deployed.
Yeah. Yeah. So now that you've learned all of this, I guess we can go into kind of a customer narrative and kind of break it down for you even further.
Yeah.
So we're going to mainly whiteboard all this, but before we get into that, the main thing that we want to talk about is that this is a tailwind traders, so
Mm,
our fictitious companies. And by the
yeah.
way, I don't know if you've ever seen this, Ben. I have to show everybody this. If
Okay.
you do a search for Microsoft, this is a fun little thing.
Mm,
Microsoft fictitious company
Mm-hmm.
names.
Uh,
There's actually a Wikipedia article if it comes up here first, might be a fandom one. But there is, oh, I can't find it. But yeah, there is a site. Oh, there it is. List of fictional companies. And have you seen all our companies? It's quite
oh my
funny.
gosh.
Some of them that Adventure Works, Awesome Computers, Baldwin Museum of Science. So these are all these different fictitious companies that Microsoft Contoso is a big one that,
Oh yeah,
very
Contoso. There we are.
popular, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ones that you can see in here. Um, all of these different ones. Anyway, I always think that's funny when I'm
Yeah.
delivering. I'm like saying, "Oh, look at all these different ones that you'll see." But anyway, the one that we're talking about in here is our tailwind traders. So yeah, you want to give a little
Yeah.
intro to this, Ben?
Yeah. Yeah. So this the Tailwind Traders is a really good archetype for this sort of session, because what the Tailwind Traders is, as you can see, it's a relatively large customer. It's been around for a while. It's an e-commerce company, so it has the notion of innovation. It when it does its digital transformation, it's essentially already a digitized company, and so it already has this need for a highly innovative sort of environment, and it is already thinking about engaging its customers in a direct manner. And so this is a really good example of how to go about optimizing, or excuse me, migrating and then optimizing for the cloud. One of the things that also I think is really nice about the Tailwind Traders is that it's it's a relatively large customer, or it's a relatively large company. It has about 3,500 employees, and it has a pretty large uh, IT department. And that's because they've got about 100 people in their IT department, and that's relatively large, because what they what that's describing is a group of people who are completely aligned to the IT strategy. And so, what they typically are doing with this information, or with their technology, is they're redefining the way they think about their position as a leader in modern commerce. So they are really thinking about their CIO, who just came on board. He had the previous one had retired, and now there's a new one. They're really trying to understand, how do they go about innovating. And so innovation comes in two ways here. One is through their Boundless Commerce project. Boundless project, Boundless Commerce is it really is looking at how they go about dealing with drone. They're trying to figure out how to do better drone deliveries. They're thinking about how to lower the amount of time it takes to deliver the solution, or the product. And so they're really in the process of trying to use data and AI to one, do two things. They're trying to do two things here. They're looking at how their commerce app is supporting their customers' experience, and then they're also using data to ensure that their backend systems are as seamless and performant as possible. Uh, and so these are just two of the types of apps. Um, they have 1,200. So it's a relatively large organization, in the sense that 1,200 applications. Some of them may stay on premise, some of them may go to the cloud, but in general, this is a large organization. The other aspect to this, did you want to say something there?
No, I was just agreeing, the 1,200 applications, and like you said, like, which one did they put in the cloud, right? And so that's their struggle, right? The
Yeah, yeah.
modernization and migration of it all.
Yeah, so some of the applications they're going to want to keep on-prem for a while. But at some they have to come up with kind of a list of applications in which they want to migrate. So what's that list look like?
And
So
how do
that's
they
one issue.
achieve that balance, right?
Hmm. Yeah, so they've got smart storefronts, which is that, high engagement with their customer base. They have corporate headquarters, which are mainly internal applications. They have user workstations, where they're already doing things like virtual desktop sort of solutions. And then they have their central operations, which is their IT operations. And so all of these are, and actually not just IT, but IoT and OT applications. And so these are all different sorts of applications that they could bring to the cloud. So the question becomes, which one, or which ones? And so that's where the cloud adoption framework really helps to kind of make some determinations, or give some clear guidelines and criteria to consider as you're thinking about which ones going to move to the cloud first.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And then the other thing that you were saying earlier is that, this company, they've been around for a while, like you said, very innovative because they're using e-commerce. So they've, they were already a digital company, right?
Hmm.
But now they need to look at, you know, how we can innovate with AI, which is what we're just discussing. And so one of the things that they've or that they're doing is they've this kind of sounds sad, but the previous CEO decided to retire. He's like, you know what? I had my fun, I had my fill, created this great company, but now we need to come up with a new strategy, right? And so
Right,
this is
right.
what this company's looking at. And we're seeing that a lot with some of these companies, not that their CEOs are retiring, but this whole concept of, okay, I'm ready to go to the cloud. So if you're ready to go to the cloud, you have to look at your strategy, right? And so what that means. And so
Hmm.
this is, this little diagram that you and I were talking about the other day, and how
Hmm.
great this diagram is. So yeah,
Hmm.
if you want to talk to that, this is awesome.
Yeah, yeah. So this is one of those diagrams that we talk a lot about or use a lot when we talk about the transformation from a central IT team to a delegated IT team. And one of the most interesting things about this is that in a central IT team, you're almost always dealing with enforcing and controlling certain policies or usage of the IT resources. And that's because it's really important. It's really important for that IT team to know where all the services are, who's using the services, how, like what sort of usage there is, what sort of capacity requirements do they still need, um, all the planning that's involved. And then, of course, there's that annual budget discussion of like, what's the capacity planning look like this year? What does our budget look like this year? What sort of services and applications can we actually provide to our customer based on our budgets? And so those sorts of central planning and budgeting requirements need that sort of enforcement and control. However, once you start to move to the cloud, a lot of those underlying infrastructure requirements and the budgeting begins to get a little bit more fluid. It gets more fluid because what you're essentially being able to do is look at how you're spending your budget on a periodic basis, so not on a yearly basis, but let's say you want to do it on a monthly basis. You can start to see how that infrastructure is being used because you're using an OpEx model. And you're also beginning to think more about what are all the different services that could be used or are being used now? What's the capacity of that utilization? And then you can, by doing so, what you're effectively doing is you have a much broader, much more visible sort of observability model that makes it possible to see what your costs are, how well you're supporting the business, and how quickly you're moving forward with your plans. And so that's one of the reasons why people and this notion of a new strategy is important. So what is this particular diagram saying? What this is saying is, like on the left-hand side, is you basically are a traffic cop. And as a traffic cop, what you're essentially being able to do is say, there's a red light, green light, and yellow light. If it's a red light, you need to stop. No matter who's involved. Like if there's no other customer or sorry, if there's no other car, if there's no other person, you still have to stop. And you have to stop as long as that's a red light. That's a very different sort of model than what you have on the right-hand side, which is you have kind of this set of guardrails where, or a set of concepts that everyone follows. So in this sort of circle, all you have to do is look left. And if you look left and there's no car, then you can move forward. And so it's a much more fluid model. And so that sort of concept is really what we're trying to drive here in this concept, in this new strategy, where you give your workload teams, you give the innovation teams a sense for what's necessary. What are the policies they should follow? But that's all. They don't have to, all, you don't have to like actually uh, constantly stop them from doing something, or all you need to do is give them a set of policies that they can consistently apply in any sort of in corporate environment. and then they'll have that empowerment to go and innovate in their own way. So I'll just stop
Yeah.
there. I just love
No, I
this
was just
diagram.
thinking too with the fluid and that capability of being able to do that, it's really about the skilling, like we've been saying a couple of
Yeah.
times already,
Mm-hmm.
that in order to support this type of model where you're constantly going around and you can go out and you can keep going, you really need to understand, all of the features and capability, the Azure cloud and Microsoft 365 has to offer, right? So just Microsoft's cloud in overall. And then based on that, then you can start putting, like you said, your guardrails, right? Start
Mm-hmm.
putting in those Azure policies. Start using, your identity protection. There's a lot of intra security capabilities. And then on Microsoft 365 side, you've got a lot of data security where you can use, your classification. And once you implement all of that, then yeah, it's a fluid because as they're deploying, like I can say, you're going to deploy a virtual machine. I can say, well, you can't deploy it in this region based on a policy, or you can't use this SKU, which is, the amount you're going to pay and the resources you're going to get based on a policy. And then, and being able to do that, people are going to, yeah, that's a kind of a stop, but they can still keep going and moving on to the next one that they can do. Right. So it's all about, understanding, what the cloud has to offer, Microsoft's cloud, and then implementing all of that. And then from there, you'll get that freedom and delegated responsibility. Like back in, on premise, thinking about delegated responsibility, you ask me, oh, I was a SharePoint administrator and, I had site collection, people that are managing their own site collection, but did I give them site collection ownership? Are you kidding me? No, right? Because there was
Right.
no proper guardrails back then to say, policies that I can implement. Whereas with the Microsoft Cloud, I can delegate, right? Like for example, there's, in Entra, you've got something called privileged identity management, where I
Mm-hmm.
can, as a privileged identity management administrator, I can give Ben, application developer rights, and he can request them on an hour time being, and we can monitor that and so on. So, but you need to know about these capabilities and be able to get that type of, flow.
Yeah, and I think with Tradewinds here too, they have a lot of different types of systems.
Yeah.
Some of them, some of them are mission critical, and so like mission critical to them, like, and you can also say business critical. And so they those particular applications are going to require a kind of a more stringent set of guardrails versus the
Hmm.
what we would consider a baseline. So everyone needs to follow the baseline, i.e., the guardrails. But then there's going to be certain policies, certain applications that are going to need even more requirements. They're going to have higher levels of policy that they need to follow. And so that's another aspect to this that needs to be considered is when you're thinking about which applications you're going to migrate to the cloud, which ones require just baseline. So if you have a bunch of applications that just require baseline, where you've defined baseline as security baseline and identity baseline and management baseline, we'll get to more of that in the next episode. But once you've kind of got that baseline, it's pretty easy to say, here are the applications that require just the baseline. Those are probably the best ones to migrate first. Because those are the ones that when you're using the cloud effectively, but you're not having to go overboard. You can test the way you go about operating these applications. You can see how well they've migrated over effectively. You can test your own team to see if they're migrating these applications and operating them effectively. So once you've kind of got that first cadre of or cohort of applications, then you can really, start to think about those mission critical apps.
Yeah, exactly. And so one of the other things that
Mm.
Tailwind
Yeah.
is doing is they're moving their data centers to the cloud. And so as you and I are having this conversation the other day, that one of the biggest ones that you have to get on board and work with is your finance director, so your CFO,
Hmm.
right? So that
Right.
whole cost optimization is, and you said it earlier, could also be one of the biggest ones that can stop you from doing things, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in this case, this case study here with the three data centers that they need to move to the cloud, there's a particular reason for that. And this is something we see a lot actually, is when the data center lease is up,
Yeah.
where you've been working with a particular infrastructure provider, and they are basically saying, okay, are you going to renew or not? And this is usually a time, this is a big IT trigger where customers are saying, you know what, let's move to the cloud. And then the question becomes, how are we going to do this within the time frame we have? So with Trailwinds, they essentially had 18 to 24 months to move it, to basically consolidate all their data centers into the cloud. And so 1,200 applications, how quickly are they going to be able to do that? How are they going to be able to do that and have a certain level of business continuity? So that sort of question again happens a lot, and a lot of people are asking that right now, because yeah, there's a lot of data center leasing that's coming up in this fiscal or this calendar year, excuse me. So how do you do that? What do you do first? Well, first, one of the first things you can do is there's a bunch of cost optimization or cost management tools that you can look into. So there's like pricing calculators. There's different sort of TCO calculators. And so I think we actually have a few of those uh,
Yeah.
available.
You want to show?
If you
Yeah,
want to
let
take
me
a quick
show.
look at those.
Show and tell.
Yeah.
So yeah, just doing a simple search on pricing calculator. As you can see in here, it pulls up. Once you get into there, then as I scroll down, you can see all the different types of services, right? Or categories, so to speak. And then each category will have, the types of services that you can use. So for example, if I'm in compute and I want to build a virtual machine, but I want to see how much it's going to cost me, I can click on that. And then what happens is, as if I go to view, which just basically scrolls you down the page, then I can see, the cost for that. Now, as we were saying, like there's different cost aspects to a service, right? One, for example, could be the region, right? A region could be cheaper than others. Regions where we get billed, different taxes based on the country will also will be why, running a server in say East US as opposed to Brazil could be more expensive because the tax deficit that we get and so on. The other thing, it could be, what is the, what am I building? What are the cores? How much do I need? And so on. And then the other one could be, well, how long am I running it for? Am I running it hourly? But you can also get these cost savings in there, right? And this is the one that, you and I had this discussion yesterday about savings plans versus reserved instances. And so what
Yeah.
was the savings plan again? It was kind of the
Yeah. So savings plan is a new. It was introduced about 18 months ago, and what it is it's a very flexible way of going about determining your capacity. And basically, what it does is you can pre-purchase a certain amount of capacity or a certain number of hours that you would expect to use when you're running your applications. And so, and it's really based on the way you want to go about using the compute services. And so, once you've kind of got a sense for what those are, you can go about either selecting a 1 year savings plan or a 3 year savings plan. And that'll basically give you a certain number of hours in that 1 year or in that 3 year plan that will basically allow you to save money because there's a certain commitment there. But
yeah,
what's nice about that is it's flexible. It's more flexible than what we're
exactly.
about to show you.
Yeah.
And
And that was the
yeah, if you
big one,
wanted to talk
right? Because
about
you
that
and
one,
I were
yeah.
trying to figure out what's the difference. And the difference is that the savings plan I can delete the VM and get rid of it at any time, and I won't be penalized for that because, and it like essentially like if I purchase it for a price, it's fixed price. If the price goes down, I'll still get that. The price will go down with me as well, right? We're not going to say you're not going to come. It's not one of those ones where the price went down. How much come I'm still paying the same
Correct.
one? It's
Right.
basically saying that the price will never go up on you, right?
Right.
And you're fixed to that price. But if you decide after 6 months I don't need this compute workload anymore, you can delete it and not have to worry about paying the other 6 months if you did a 1 year. Whereas reserved is different, right? You're locked in to that 1 year, and even if you delete it or not, you're still going to have to pay that 1 year. But you get a better cost savings, as you can see in here. And then the other
Yes.
one is the license, right? So the hybrid, you see
Mm-hmm.
the price drop over here. So
Yeah.
if you have your own licenses that you're using right now, like a software
On
assurance
premise.
licensing that you can still use, you can use that and bring that into like a BYOL, right? Bring your own license,
Yeah.
so
Right.
to
Right.
speak.
Right.
Yeah,
There's so much to cost and
yeah,
pricing that we could talk to. Thankfully, this is a topic that will be covered in the fourth episode. Antonio is going to go deep. He and Priyanka will go deep on advisor and cost optimization. So we could probably stop here and kind of finish up. We only have a few minutes left, so I'm wondering if we should go to the knowledge check and just kind of get a sense for how people have consumed the content and see if everyone's feeling good about what they've learned,
just do
or
it.
we can just kind of close it out. Up to you.
We could go through. I
Yeah.
definitely want to go through a couple of them, Oz. I just gave you the
Okay.
answers. So yeah. So which assets in the technology portfolio summary aren't compatible with Azure? Right. So we got VM virtualization, Linux and other open source servers running Windows Server, or all of these assets are compatible. Hmm. Well, I guess you could say with the big push with open source, or with Microsoft's big push, ever since we bought GitHub, right? We become really more embracing to all technologies.
Yeah.
I'm hoping you went with D, right? So everything is compatible with Azure. You can even bring in, you can do a hybrid with AWS if you want. I don't know
Wow.
why, but you could.
Well, yeah, just at Ignite this year, we announced the huge strategic relationship with Oracle. So you can actually run Oracle instances right against or right next to your SQL instances, SQL
Yeah,
Server instances. So yeah, it's pretty amazing just how flexible the infrastructure has become.
yeah. Good. And then what risks might prevent tailwind traders from successfully migrating to data centers in the next 18 to 24 months? Effort and time to migrate the portfolio, controls to operate the migrated assets, organization of people, teams, and responsibilities, or it depends. All of these risks might apply. I always call the D the IT answer, right? It depends. And
Yeah.
I always say that when a student asks me a question, I'm like, well, it depends. Let me give you the IT answer, right? So yeah, so it depends because they might all apply. The other one too is let's keep going. Is which getting started guides can help you if your adoption efforts stopped or reached a plateau. So actually, I probably shouldn't have phased through that. There is a get starting guides
Mm.
that you can connect to and get to, and they will give you, the whole life cycle. So the established teams, improve controls, accelerate adoption, and align foundation. So the four different areas of life cycle with that. Mm.
Yeah, I would like to one comment about that is, and because I know we have to move as fast as possible, but one comment. There's 3,000 to 4,000 pages of the cloud adoption framework. Massive, massive
So it's
set
a
of
light
content.
read.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that's why we have these getting started guides actually. Basically what they're doing is uh, bringing together the most important, the most salient things to get you started. So
Yeah.
you can find these getting started guides very close to the top of the table of contents in the cloud adoption framework. So it's easy to find. You could actually go do a search on getting started guides in the cloud adoption framework, and you will be able to start right away with these 4 different principles here.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so
And
which getting started guides can
yeah,
help if your adoption efforts stopped or reach a plateau?
it's a good one, but I know which one I would go with. What do you think?
I think you need to, if you're having problems adopting efforts, then my guess would either be it could be your team or you need to improve some type of control there.
Yeah, see, I'm looking at it and thinking it could actually be aligning your foundation too, because you're probably thinking about all the different workloads that you have to align to the foundation.
Okay,
So
well, let's see who's right.
there
Ah,
you go. Okay, well,
I can see the answers. That's why.
yeah. Oh, well, okay, fine.
Ben thought I was so brilliant.
Well, see, it shows what kind of subject matter expert I am. But
Anyway, okay. So which getting started guides can help if they're progressing slower than expected? I'm just going to go through these quickly because
yeah,
we're at time. Accelerate adoption can help you with progressing slower than that one's pretty good, right? Adopting,
yeah.
the belief that the cloud rules. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's going to be what you want to do. Accelerate that. And then the IT governance is concerned about guardrails. Outline how can you partner with it to establish right guardrails. That's working with your teams, right? So making sure
Mhm.
your teams are aware of all the different aspects of security. And that's a huge one. You have
Mhm.
networking teams, firewall teams, identity authentication teams, server
Mhm.
teams. They all need to know what type of guardrails there are. Designing a cloud environment that can support your term adoption plan is slowing your adoption plans. How do you get back on track? Again,
Mhm.
accelerating adoption. And then the business is responding to rapidly changing market conditions, which is disrupting cloud adoption, digital transformation progress, which getting started guide can help you, working with teams. And then I think we got one more. Yeah. So you need to be able to onboard new employees, partners, or other forms of support. How can you accelerate onboarding and transitions? So that's working with the Aligning Foundation. So in summary, we talked about, common roadblocks that we prevent adoption success, and that's, cost optimization, getting your finance director on board, and then, talked about evaluating one or more guides that can help you get things started or move faster, and then get started on a proper course. So the next steps for all of you is read the cloud adoption framework, right? Go through the modules, go through all of that information. There's also a cloud skills challenge that you can also try out and go through that. And then there's also register for Azure virtual training days on optimization, which, I did those. So you should see
Yeah,
them coming up
that's right.
shortly. I think in February they get
Yep.
released.
Yep.
And so keep an eye out for those virtual training days and then they'll be up. And then again, here's your link to the Learn modules. And then the next episode, which is episode 2, will be coming out next week. And who's in that one, Ben? I can't remember.
Yeah, myself and Jeff Mitchell,
There you go.
and yeah, that's going to be a fun session. We'll talk a lot more about management and governance, and then how to implement those sorts of policies in a landing zone.
Yeah. So continuing your journey with cloud adoption framework. So don't miss that for next week. And I'll make sure if you're following me on LinkedIn, Conger at LinkedIn, that I will be posting, to join. Other than that, it was great working with you, Ben, obviously, as
Yeah.
usual.
Yep.
And I guess that's it, folks. We'll see you next time. Ben, any final words?
Nope. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone. And if you do have questions, ping me in chat, or sorry, ping me on LinkedIn, and I'll answer questions there. Thanks very
Yeah,
much.
find us on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye bye.